Thanks very much for making time to meet with us today. We're talking with Ron Noble and Nate Sandvig about their campaign for Congressional District 6. You guys are both the Republicans running the primary. And I'm just going to start off by asking Ron, if you wouldn't mind going first to explain a little bit about yourself and why you're running for Congress.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you again for doing this, host. Yes, I sure appreciate it. My name is Ron Noble. I grew up in CD6, which is, and I say that because that's one of the reasons that I'm running. Grew up in Polk County and now live in Yamhill County, but I've lived in Salem, and many of my family are from the Washington County area. After graduating high school and going to college, my career was in law enforcement. I was 18 years in the Benton County, Corvallis area, and then retired as police chief in McMinnville after 8 years. And was approached then to run for state representative. So I've been representing House District 24 for the last 3 terms or 6 years, which is McMinnville up to the Hillsborough area. Very much enjoyed that. The political, I guess from my standpoint, to be effective in politics, it's just a matter of trying to listen and understand how everybody works and what's important to them. Doesn't change your viewpoint necessarily, but it sure gives you some insight on how to work. And so when this seat opened in CD6, which is again where I've spent the last 47 years of my life, I had to take a hard look and one, figure out if this is something that works for my family, and then see if it works from a standpoint of what my knowledge is, what my expertise is. And I believe it does. I've got 5 kids, 4 adult kids and 9 grandchildren, and my family is absolutely behind me in this. They're working out a way to make sure our multi-generational household and my parents and my wife's parents are taken care of at the same time, allowing us some freedom to travel back and forth should we be successful. And then looking at I guess the fortune I've had in the legislature of working on issues that are really near and dear to us at the federal level, from community safety issues, public safety, and then along with, I guess, addressing some of the issues that we've had over the years in our public safety and policing and criminal justice system, as well as transportation and infrastructure, human services, dealing with children and seniors and people with disabilities, and then with healthcare and trying to figure out a way to increase access, reduce cost for healthcare, and minimize, or I guess reduce, the costs of pharmaceutical drugs. So all those are issues that we're dealing with at the federal level. Those are the issues I've experienced in. And when I put that all together, we decided that we needed to seize an opportunity with a brand new district to represent Oregon and quite honestly, bring some balance to the contingent that we have representing us in this state to Washington, D.C. And that's the reason I'm running.
Great, thank you very much. Nate, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your reasons for running?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm a veteran, a West Point grad, energy executive, father of 4, running to bring some normalcy and sanity back to life and politics. From my upbringing from West Point, believe in service over self and dedicated to duty to country. And it's time to get off the sidelines here and get involved. Otherwise, you're just complaining, and we need real leadership and good candidates to run who are responsible and responsive and accountable representatives that listen and serve all the people representing them that I hope to bring to the table. I've been here in Oregon for over a decade. I joke I'm a recovering wind energy developer. I've been working on renewables here in the Northwest since the big build out, and looking forward to the next big build out. When I got out of the Army after getting back from Iraq, my mantra was I'd rather develop energy here than get shot at over there. So, that's inspired me, in terms of a purposeful life, working on these large scale projects throughout the region. been blessed to work for a couple of these projects, billion-dollar projects, a lot of consensus building. One's down in Klamath Falls, Swan Lake pump storage project, uses a novel technology called gravity. I've been focused on energy for a while. So, we got wind and solar, and, you need something to fill in the holes here when the wind doesn't blow and you got clouds at night. So these projects, large scale and, kind of the cornerstone like hydropower has for our region here. And there's one out in the gorge, the Goldendale pump storage project. But father to 4 amazing kids, like many sane people here, a lot of people are moving, but, I'd like to stay and fight. I love Oregon. Used to love Portland. It's going through some growing pains now, but, having the courage not to run and fight it out. And Eisenhower is kind of my North Star, general, and, in terms of kind of a citizen politician, not a career politician, led deliberately during a time of peace. And so, in terms of the issues too, that I'm focused on, of course, the energy independence. You can see what's happening in Ukraine, not being energy independent, and then the economy and the cost of life, just being able to afford living. Everybody talks about the gas and groceries and, just in a wage, keeping up with the cost of life here. And so that's certainly a big focus. We've been printing money. When I was in Iraq, there's a couple trillion there between Afghanistan and Iraq, and bailout of 2008, and there's a couple more trillion in COVID. So we're spending money like a drunk sailor, and we need to think about our kids and the long-term impact of that, and get the reckless spending under control. And then what really drove me into this was education, just with my kids, standing with parents to prioritize our children's education over the teachers' unions. It seemed like the Democrats were AWOL in the pockets of the unions here when we were going through COVID. So that really drove me into the arena here with trying to make a difference. And then lastly, just with, I felt safer in Iraq than Portland these days, with law and order and the crime there. It seems like you're either a homicide, homeless, or high in Portland, and just getting the crime under control and supporting the police and respecting our police instead of vilifying them. So those a little bit about the issues and a little bit about myself and why I'm running.
Great, thank you. Let's start off with you, Nate, on this question. You don't live in the district. Should that matter?
Well, I've been in Oregon for over a decade. I feel like the issues I'm running on are universal to everybody. I saw the map there in your paper over the weekend. For my estimation, it looked like Portland should be running the state. Everybody was inside that box. I got drawn out when I started this process. I feel like I can easily move into the district. When I started, I was running against Schrader. I believe he spends more time in Maryland, Wyden in New York. And, I certainly don't take the voters for granted. It's, I guess Ron and I's opponent drew the magical lines. The voters I talk with in the district, they haven't seen a candidate in over a decade. And as we know, gerrymandering's, political corruption. So, I think it's a distracting issue that's taken away from, what really matters, what we need to focus on. And I can easily move, but it's hard to move on a dime. The lines were drawn late last year. I got drawn out along with a lot of other great candidates too.
So tell me a little bit then about what you've been doing to understand what are the issues of importance to constituents of the 6th district in particular.
Is that to me, Helen?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, again, I think it's the economy and the cost of life. When I first bought my house here in Oregon, the first one, it was about $300,000, and to buy a house for a family, it's about $800,000. So just to be able to live, the American dream seems like an endangered species. With my 4 kids, I certainly want that to be an achievable reality for them and not a perishing fantasy. A lot of that, these inflation, these lavish government benefits we thought were free, that's actually inflation. So, getting the spending under control and getting, creating opportunity. These big projects I'm working on, they create thousands of jobs throughout the region in Oregon, and they help with the 100% clean energy in terms of doing that cost effectively and reliably. California's down that same path, and their electric rates have tripled, and they continue to go up. So just affordability. I mean, that's what was everybody's mind, the inflation, and that was a problem, before, gas prices, rose even higher with Ukraine. A lot of concern around homeless, certainly, addressing that issue, working with the next governor. A lot of that, frankly, I feel like was caused by decriminalizing crime, and the response time for cops. And a lot of that is spilled out of Portland into the 6th district. With a lot of the crime and the homeless there, and education. Lastly, again, just prioritizing the education. We're kind of at the bottom of the barrel here in Oregon, and focusing on the basics and addressing mental health from the COVID, with the kids out of school and getting them caught up. So. Okay,
great, thank you, Ron. A slight modification of the question for you. Should it matter to constituents where their congressional representative lives?
Helen, I think what really should matter is how well the candidate knows the district. How intimate are they with the issues going on in the rural parts of Polk and Yamhill counties, and even part of south of Salem in the rural issues of Marion County, and what's important to those people there, and how they're trying, sometimes struggling. We talked about earlier before we started recording, even internet. They don't, I don't have broadband available at my home. I use a hotspot, and that's pretty typical for some of the rural areas of Oregon. And then how that I guess coordinates and interacts with the urban areas, the manufacturing and high-tech areas along I-5 that head north into the Tualatin, Tigard area, and more into the urban areas of South Washington County and Clackamas County. And that dynamic of urban rural really is in the 6th district, and it's unique to the people here, and how Salem fits into that. I think there are a lot of issues that we deal with that are similar throughout the state, but the Midland Valley is a little unique in how the history of how we come about, some of the growth that's occurred in some cities and the lack of growth in other cities. Transportation through some of our cities works well. In other cities, it actually creates a problem and divides us. Much the same way some of the arguments through with the Rose Quarter and I-5 happens in smaller communities as well. So I think voters need to best understand who has the most knowledge about who they're representing, the dynamics of CD6, and what that looks like as you're moving forward and representing you in Washington.
Great, thank you. Tell me, if you were elected, and Ron, this question goes to you first, what would voters see as a result of your having been in office? What impact will you have in your first term as congressman?
I think what they'll see is somebody who honestly represents all voters over anything else, who understands the dynamic of policy and negotiation, and also looking for the unintended consequences. Unfortunately, in our society, both local, state, and federal, we tend to make decisions based on the information right in front of us, and just a little bit more thoughtful, and we can maybe avoid some of the pitfalls down the road as some policies are enacted, both at the federal level. Well, in this case, at the federal level, I think they'll find someone who is trustworthy, who is willing to listen to anyone, and who can be counted upon to be stable and represent them to the best of his ability.
Thank you. Nate, same question for you. What impact do you expect to have in your first term as congressman if elected?
My 2-year term? Yeah, I've actually walked the halls in DC advocating for these big projects, just as much as I have in the district here. And, a lot of it comes down to the budget process in DC, knowing that process, and, fighting for what matters and what's important to Oregonians at home. And, fighting for funding, for programs and projects and opportunities. And that's largely the budget process that never ends in DC, and that's a lot of walking the halls, a lot of 15-minute meetings in DC with constituents and colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I think that the biggest existential threat facing us is climate change. I actually believe in it, believe in the science around climate change, and fighting that with clean energy. We have the solutions now to do that. Wind, solar, especially in this state, pump storage. We have the cornerstone resource to make this all happen. The hydropower that built the region, of course, which is largely responsible for how much renewables we currently have. And then new hydropower, and then, electric vehicles, transportation. But, I think as a Republican, believing in climate change is somewhat of a unicorn. And I have the energy experience, and the relationships to know how to implement that. It's a big headline that Oregon has 100% standard, but how we actually achieve that without increasing the costs exponentially and decreasing the reliance on our grid, I think is going to be a big challenge, because then we want to plug everything into that grid. So we need to know that. And that's, all around the goals of decarbonization, but it requires funding and incentives, a lot of private infrastructure, and knowing the budget process. And I've been working across the aisle on this for many years. And then just from my Army experience, I've worked with all race, color, and creed, and so I can work and talk to anybody as long as we have a common goal and figure out how to do it cost effectively and reliably, and hopefully have fun doing it.
Thank you. And that actually segues into my next question, and that's about energy independence. You wrote about that a little bit in your responses to our questions, and Nate, this question is for you first. But what does energy independence look like, and what are some, specific ideas or proposals that you would want to see the government undertake? What would you be pushing for in Congress?
Yeah, well, all the above, as long as it's, good for the environment and it's cheap or cost effective and reliable. We've really scaled up when it comes to wind and solars and solar. And, I think the big challenge here is batteries with lithium. I joke we're going to be fighting lithium war. Our kids are going to be fighting lithium wars. It's the Chinese controlling 70% of that market, but trying to figure out how to do that independently and thinking about the waste and recycling. Again, here we have these pump storage projects, and then the dynamic with the rural urban, the land use for wind and solar takes up a lot of space. But we need the investment tax credit, production tax credit, that really in combination with the state RPS really, no pun intended, powers us forward. There's modular nuclear, in terms of scale. We really need to think about scale, so how we do that. Those are kind of the issues there that I would focus on, or in terms of how to go about doing it. But and I try to be a net exporter, frankly, of energy, but the technology piece too. I've been to Switzerland and some of these billion-dollar projects and how they're going about it. We need to have partnerships with the technical experts that know how to do these projects also. So that answer your question there, Helen?
Yes, thank you. And Ron, a similar question for you. And what specific clean energy policies or legislation would you support, or is that something that you think is an area that Congress needs to be involved in?
Well, I think absolutely. We've the climate's been changing since the Earth was created, so it will continue to change. I think from my standpoint, we have a responsibility to take care of our natural resources and this beautiful Earth that we've been given. The idea that we're going to be on fossil fuels forever, I think, is false, and would agree that there are new technologies out there. I think as we're looking at rural versus urban, technology looks different right now. where we have the ability to switch to electricity in a lot of urban areas that is really not fully developed in rural areas. There's more work in McMinnville here in CD6. We have a manufacturer that manufactures small hydrogen fuel cells for drones, actually for the military. And being able to go from a battery operated drone of 2 to 3 hours to an 8 to 10 hour flight time with a hydrogen fuel cell, which may or may not be new technologies that comes forward too. I think we need to maximize those technologies and look for ways to meet our energy needs, and at the same time provide a climate and an environment that is positive, as opposed to continue to degrade the planet. I don't think that the idea of climate change is a political decision, that maybe we've got into that to where it's a Republican versus Democrat thing. I think it's the solution really is where the politics play out, and how much should the government be involved versus private industry. And I think there's a partnership there. The government has a role. I think private industry sometimes is minimized. I think private industry can be the ones who actually are the innovative ones to come up with new technologies and new solutions. So I look forward to again, something that works in the long term. Back in 2020, when cap and trade was in front of the legislature, one of the things that people missed is the Mid-Atlantic cap and trade agreement was falling apart because states were finding that it wasn't working for them. And then California was providing exemptions for the trade part, and businesses were either leaving. So it may have provided some short-term solutions, but long-term, it hasn't proven to be what people had hoped it to be. So I think Oregon needs to look for, and actually I'm a carry it to the nation, look for a solution that fits the US as again, meeting those energy needs. And that may be, again, based on rural versus urban, and one end of the country versus the other end of the country based on natural resources and ability.
Great, thank you. Ron, this question is for you. What should the federal government's next step be in its response to COVID? For instance, right now there are negotiations going on for what looks to be a $10 billion bill for tests, vaccines, therapeutics. What would you support such a bill? And overall, what is your view on the federal government's responsibility at this point?
Well, COVID is an interesting, I guess, study, and time will tell. Many people know that most of my family are healthcare providers, from physicians to therapists to nurses, and so I live it vicariously. My son's a physician in the Air Force and responsible for the clinic at Peterson Air Force Base, and again, the COVID vaccinations. So he's up on most of the technical information. What is sad is that the response to COVID has become a political issue. And oftentimes I was asked, Representative, should I get vaccinated? And, my expertise is law enforcement, and then spent some time in the legislature. I am not qualified to tell someone whether they should get vaccinated. That's between them and their physician. And I think the federal government has a role in listening to public health experts and in determining what that role should be. But it became a political thing. I find it interesting that we were able to predict when the emergency was going to be over in Oregon by more than a month, as opposed to responding to the emergency when it happens, and then the emergency's over when the emergency's over. So, there's sadly been politics that have been injected into the whole discussion. I mean, for a while, people would make judgments on whether you were a Republican or Democrat by whether you decided to wear a mask, not whether you were safe or compromised or what your personal concerns are. So going forward, I would hope that the federal government would encourage states to make decisions based on health, and then provide as much personal freedom in those choices between an individual and their own physician as possible. As vaccines are developed, and they will be, hopefully much more effective, but so we don't know where this is going. Is this going to be like a flu shot every year, or is this going to be an actual vaccine that ends up providing a resolution similar to polio or some other issues? So I think as we move forward, we have to be careful to ensure the health and safety of our population, but at the same time, not take away the freedoms that we need to have and the ability for people to consult with their own physicians.
So why do you think it became political?
Unfortunately, it's like a lot of other things that happen. Climate control became political. I think because a lot of politicians decided to make it political, quite honestly, and I'm going to blame those who are in office. So I will include me in that group because I can't, disassociate from this group that I'm involved in the legislature. But I think different people throughout the country and throughout in Oregon, the state, made it political. There was no consistency across the country, and people. I mean, if you look, there are a lot of people even saying that there's no consistency within the state, which lends to those theories that it's more of a political decision as opposed to a healthcare decision.
How much of that, though, do you think stems from the fact that this is a disease and a virus that we are still learning a lot about? I mean, as you yourself noted, we don't know, is this going to be a yearly flu shot type of thing?
I think that's exactly what it is. The other half of my family are engineers. And so I'm surrounded by scientists on a daily, and the science doesn't change. What we do is we discover more about the science, and then the interpretation might change especially when it's new. And so I think that's part of the issue where we make a decision, be it the government or a physician makes a decision based on what they know at the time. And then 6 months later, we make a different decision because we know more. And that causes conspiracy theories, that causes confusion, and opens the door for political pull in one direction or the other, or both directions, actually.
And just to close the loop on this one aspect of the question, there's under consideration now, or under development really, a $10 billion deal that would go toward increased purchases of vaccines, therapies, and tests. What would you support something like that?
I support the concept. I'm having been in the position, at least in the State House, of making promises to vote or support something without seeing the actual text is dangerous. But the concept of doing more to find out about what this virus is doing, what the long-term implications are, and then what is the true solution, I think would be a valid investment.
Thank you very much. Nate, to you. Basically the same question. What is the role that the federal government should be playing at this point in dealing with the pandemic?
Yeah, well, I guess I say all politics is local. From a principle standpoint, as a Republican, middle of the road, I think just we've taken a lot of individual responsibility and initiative. We've encouraged kind of an opposite approach, versus I think the joke I heard, the Republicans, you stay home if you get sick and you do the right thing. And, Democrats want everybody else to stay home. Or everybody to stay home. But at this point, we have the tools. I mean, the science is we got to listen to the science. I'm not a medical expert. I think the biggest challenge right now, here I am advocating for these big projects and climate change. And then we ignored the science when it came to getting our kids back into school. And I talked to my representatives, all Democrats. They were AWOL. There was no issue. They were in the pockets of the teachers' unions, and it became a very political issue. COVID, and our children, who had no voice, the least at risk, were punished the most. I mean, it was heart-wrenching, to see my kindergartner behind the screen trying to learn, and he's the least at risk, because we couldn't get, some parents wanted an in-person option, and that wasn't provided to, and my politicians at the time, didn't want to listen to their elected officials, listen to science. Other places in the world were dealing with it, and I got the vaccine, because I wanted my kids back in school, and I didn't want to wear a mask, and I didn't want them to wear a mask. And, now, I think we have the tools, and now it's something we just got to live with, like the flu. And, you do the right thing as an individual, when you think you have it or you think you're exposed to it, like we've learned to live with the flu, and getting sick is just part of the, maybe if you have kids, you get sick more often, but, getting sick is, just part of life, I feel like. And, I think holistically, focusing on, if you look at the science and the statistics, a lot of the people that had COVID and died, unfortunately, had comorbidities. So focusing on healthy living, good mental health, exercise, eating right, and thinking big picture, I think will help also, not just against COVID, but against other things that face us as a population also. But got to listen to our professionals, and as the federal government, you need to have credibility and confidence in the decisions that were made. And it's I lost a lot of confidence myself on what was being said because things just kept changing. You didn't know what to believe. So, taking time to think through policy and trying to be as consistent and provide credibility and confidence, at a higher level, and then at a local level, how things are implemented, leaving that to those there that are elected.
And would you support additional spending to buy tests, vaccines, therapies, et cetera?
Well,
on
yes.
a federal basis?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
So I wanted to follow up a little bit on the questions you guys answered in the survey number 5 in particular, and I think, Nate, we're starting with you now. I was reading in your answer to the questions about the events of January 6th, and I think that you called it a distraction, the way the investigation is being handled. But I'm curious, 5 people died. There's still many questions outstanding about what happened with security, how the event was planned, how it was executed. So if the way it's going down now, you think is, I think you also called it a partisan witch hunt, how best to understand what happened? I mean, I'd like to get your opinion of truly you think just discussing the event is a distraction.
Yeah, no, I was sitting at my table working from home in Portland at the time. It's horrifying. It's a tragedy, and from my time in the military and studying military history, I know what a coup looks like and certainly understand what a coup looks like. And just on its face, it looked like a bunch of hoodlums. And it's, turned into, what I think is kind of a partisan witch hunt, trying to take a lot of attention and sucking the energy and oxygen out of the room from the real issues we should be focused on that people are concerned about, like the economy, public safety, and education. And, throughout the district, I have met a lot of voters, had a lot of conversation with voters, and not one has brought it up. So not that it's not important, and you go through the process and figure out what happened and learn the lessons from that and move on. But I think the bigger issues of the economy and the cost of life and the out of control spending, printing money, and trying to get our fiscal house in order, and trying to provide opportunities and address some of the larger issues. Rising tide lifts all boats, but yeah, I haven't. That's kind of where I'm at on January 6th. I feel like it's more of a distraction from the real big issues. In terms of improving people's lives and creating opportunities on a daily basis.
Well, likely if you're in DC, you'll be doing a lot of things, a lot of work that people aren't going to be raising to you on the campaign trail, because that's what being in DC is all about. So, and recognizing that work needs to be done that may not necessarily be front and center on voters' minds, how do you think this should have been handled? I mean, you began that answer saying it looked like a coup. So arguably that's something worth addressing. How would you have done it? How would you have pushed to get that investigation done?
Yeah, I mean, I still think it's being pushed because, I'm not a career politician. I'm noticing when it comes to fundraising, you push on all these issues to help raise money, and it's kind of an opportunity to raise money off of. And I think when you're in office, it's more about doing your job than campaigning and fundraising.
All right, thank you. Ron, I'll move that question on over to you. You had kind of posed your answer in kind of in a different way, but I do get the sense that you think the investigation, you said, should be objective and not political. I can imply from that perhaps that you think it is. But I'd be curious what you think the best way to look into a situation like this one that was very terrifying for a lot of folks. 5 people died. What would be the way to do this so that it was not political?
I think I'm speaking from my career in law enforcement. If crimes have been committed, they need to be investigated, and that needs to be quick. It needs to be a reasonable time frame, and then people need to be afforded their due process rights. I'm sure there's a lot that I could gain in knowledge if I have the opportunity to go back to Congress. But from what it seems to me, and I'm going to compare this again to my framework of career law enforcement and co-chair of the House and Joint Conduct Committees in the legislature, they're 2 different processes. One, and of course, Congress runs different than the Oregon State Legislature. But if there's a crime that's been committed, that needs to be investigated by law enforcement. If there is some sort of congressional oversight of members or within the Capitol or the police department they employ, then they need to look at that. And I think sometimes when you're doing both at the same time, they get in the way of each other. And it appears that that's what's happening now. It's become political simply because just even the participation of Republicans on the committee has become political. But there's a truth somewhere, and we need to have that investigated. We need to ensure that people that have committed crimes are held accountable. We need to do that from another standpoint. If we're talking about a coup, there's no way to really know how to prepare ourselves for the next one unless we fully investigate what has happened. And that's based. That's how I formulated my response to your question.
Thank you. I had another question. So this would be back to you then, Ron, in terms of the work that we do to prevent wildfires. We've already kind of talked about climate change, but I live, as I said, out in Estacada, an area that burned back in 2020. And a lot of folks that you talk to are concerned that the way that we have been managing our forests, because there's so much federal forest land in Oregon, have created a situation in which when wildfires do come, they burn hotter and they're more destructive and more deadly. Do you agree with how we have been managing the federal forests? And if not, what would you do in Congress to change that in any way?
I think my answer would be, I think we need to start managing our federal forests. Decades ago, we took a hands-off approach, and I understand why, but we have different forests that are managed differently. From state forests to BLM to U.S. forests. And they've all proven to interact with one another. And the one example I have is the fire that ended up coming down Santiam Canyon burned for several months up in the mountains in the Cascades on federal land because they believed it was a small fire, it's fairly under control. And they made the decision not to intervene with the natural course of fire. And all it took was a once in a decade east wind to stir that fire up and wreak havoc on hundreds and hundreds of people's homes and the devastation through the Santiam Canyon. Same thing happened down south a couple of years ago in the Brookings area. And I think if we don't start managing our forests, we're going to see that more often, to where fires are going to come into the valley. Multnomah Falls area, that was getting kind of close to the Portland urban areas of Clackamas County. And I think if we don't do something, that's going to be until we burn it all, and then we won't have to worry about it. I think we need to start managing our forests and find that point of protecting the wildlife, protecting the growth, but then also providing an opportunity for us to be safe and the forest to stay as opposed to burning.
I guess I'm curious what managing means to you, because one of the tools in the managing toolbox is controlled burns. And one way those controlled burns are done is when there are wildfires going that don't seem to be coming close to places where people live, they let them burn. You're right. In this case, there was a once in 100-year east wind that kicked it up. But do you feel like generally a control is not a controlled, I'm sorry, a control burn is not a good tool in the forest management toolbox, or which would you prefer?
So one area of expertise I do not have is forest management. So as far as particular tools, I would leave that to some of the experts. But I do know that in just watching the forests, I grew up hearing about the Tillamook burn, which would be devastating today as well. I do know growing up in Dallas, there were a lot of people that did work in the forests around me. I think we need to rely on those experts to manage those forests so that we can, again, not let them burn every year. And I apologize for not having the specifics. That's one area that I have not been intimately involved in.
Well, one last question. I'll see if you have knowledge of this one. As we continue, as the country kind of figures out how to manage our forests better, in particular in Oregon, there's lots of concerns about the boundaries set up on either side of waterways that run through forests. But right now, as logging is done through the management process, they're getting too close to streams. Would you push to make those buffers bigger along the waterways that run through forests, both at the federal level, both through Forest Service and BLM?
Well, I know that was an issue in the state legislature this last session, and right now I'm thinking we need to focus on the forests. I am very concerned about the streams as someone who fishes in the streams, and you look right now, we have at least a 100-foot buffer on highways. I think it's probably the same or similar to on streams, but you can look through the forest into the clear cuts, and clear cuts look bad. That is part of forest management in some areas, not appropriate in every area. So I think the idea of doing what's best to protect our waterways, absolutely, I'm on board with. I don't know what that buffer would look like. Sometimes we want to increase those distances because it makes us feel better. I think we should take a look at the science, and it may depend on the specific geology of the particular stream, what's around that stream in that particular location.
Okay, thank you. Hey, Nate, same question to you in terms of as we look at hotter and weather and more destructive and deadly wildfires, do you agree with the tactic that's been used with U.S. Forest Service and BLM to manage our forests, or do you think it should be done in a different way?
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned, climate change. I think that's the root cause here, and getting a hold of that. And I know enough to be dangerous. I took a short course at Yale on executive forestry management. Learned a lot. Clear cuts aren't all that bad in the right spots, but I think that the active management of the forests, we're behind the 8 ball from decades of neglect with all this undergrowth and all the fuel by not doing any sort of active management. And so as a result of that, we've lost a lot of our forests through the burns. And if you look at the history of it, it seems pretty interesting with Native Americans or First Peoples, where they burned a lot of that, underbrush with controlled burns. And it's largely due to hunting, but the active management of the forest through controlled burns. But just, looking at good policy and working with the Forest Service, the state agencies and private industry on, what is good policy, what's sustainable. Something that's intrigued me that I'd like to look at, more is the satellite footage of Oregon, and you look at all the clear cuts around the state. It looked a little alarming, but that's something else. In Congress, I'd like to, have some meetings around that and figure out what we can do. We have to have a healthy economy, and that creates a lot of jobs and industry for Oregon. But how do we do it in a sustained way? And we got to look at our watersheds also, with how we manage that, and if we need to increase the buffer, around these watersheds for fish, salmon, and that's what underpins humans, the nature around us. So we need to make sure that is done sustainably, and we think of it stewards of these lands for generations, not just what's for today.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Nate, this question is for you. And actually, both of you did not support the Build Back Better plan in its current form. I'm wondering if there are any elements of it that you think are worthy investments that should move forward. And Nate, if you could start off on that.
Yeah, I joke it's, build back bankrupt or borrow back bankrupt. I mean, it looks like a lot of social spending, and I think we need to really focus on if it is an infrastructure bill, on how we define infrastructure. There doesn't seem to be much infrastructure in that bill at all, and I haven't had the time to read the 1,000+ pages of that bill, and to the extent you can find a good copy of that, or what people are trying to tuck into that. But one thing I would certainly support in that bill is a investment tax credit for storage. I think for that region, these two projects here, Swan Lake and the Goldendale project, those quite a few $1 billion of investment, and we're talking thousands of jobs, and that's a cornerstone or a poster child sort of project you would need to build a couple more 1,000 megawatts of renewables in this region to really be energy independent and have 24/7 carbon-free energy. Also, incentives for transmission infrastructure. For most of the wind in the region that's economically viable is in Wyoming and Montana. We need to reinforce those high voltage electric interconnections. And California, we have a super highway with California, and at times they're giving away free solar, kind of like we were spilling hydro back in the 60s. So we built that massive transmission infrastructure that Bonneville actually spearheaded, lobbying the Interior for that big project, the first DC project of that scale on the planet, I believe. So transmission infrastructure, and then offshore, probably a little farther down the road, but offshore wind energy, that seems promising. And, as you see, probably more people move to the coast, more people move up here from California, more climate refugees, working remotely with broadband, where we envision people living may not necessarily be where they ultimately move to, the urban areas versus the rural areas. If you have broadband, I think I'm a case in point myself, but around energy, those sort of things, and that creates prosperity and real jobs. And these, if you look at the hydropower projects we built over 70 years ago, they're still operating. So these sort of projects, the interstate system that we built in the 60s, as a result of Eisenhower's vision, we're still using that. So that's that's the kind of infrastructure I'd like to see in that actually pays for itself and provides good jobs that that lead to the American dream. Versus depending on the government for the American dream.
Thank you. Ron, same question for you. Are there any elements of the Build Back Better plan that you would support or want to see in a different package of legislation?
Yeah, I know I'm going to use what you said. Build Back Better should be built better. Yes. There are some things that are worthwhile, and I'm going to probably echo what my colleague said, in that the federal government needs to be concerned about infrastructure, especially as it relates to interstate commerce and other things. And I think my biggest issue with the Build Back Better is it seems to have a lot of pork that has nothing to do with what we're trying to accomplish, and that's not specific to this particular issue. It happens regularly in Congress, and I know that's part of it happens in the state, for that matter. That's part of negotiations and working and trying to get things across the line. But it does seem that in this time where we have already made several expenditures to assist people through COVID, through ARPA dollars and PPP and then other issues, that this would be a time that we would focus on really spending where it's necessary for infrastructure as opposed to continuing some of the the ways we've been spending, which quite honestly have been suspect as far as accountability and whether or not the money actually got to the people that it was intended to get to. So that would be my largest concern with Build Back Better, is that it includes things that I think are unnecessary. If it stays with the bill, then it would be at the expense of all those things that are necessary with regard to infrastructure and fulfilling the federal government role.
Can you give an example of what you find what do you think would be an unnecessary expenditure?
I don't have it right in front of me. And I think it has to do a lot with expending monies that are outside the normal purview of the federal government. That would be state issues. And I don't have an example. My apologies, but because I don't want to misspeak. But I know in just reading a summary of the bill, it seemed my reaction was that I don't understand why, if this is building back better and deal with infrastructure, that we would have this type of thing in here.
One of the problems that's affecting not just Oregon, but communities across the country is the lack of affordable housing. Do you think that the federal government should be taking more of a role in helping address that, either perhaps with larger public financing of affordable housing or some other aspect? And Ron, question would go to you first.
Yeah, I'm more inclined to put this on the states. Oregon's made just tremendous investments in public housing through different funds, LIFT funds and others. I think really what needs to happen, and the federal government might have a small role in this, but really I think it's states, and it's not just Oregon, that we need to create an environment where builders can build, where private industry, who are the ones who build the homes, who build residences, can actually make use of that. I think, and again, I don't believe the federal government would have a role in this at all. Oregon's going to have to take a look at our land use laws and ensure the protection of our agriculture and forest lands, but also then provide resources for new housing. The affordable housing issue, from my perspective, is a market issue. If you don't have enough homes, the price goes up like anything else. And I think if we could get more homes, that would help the process. When I started the state legislature in 2017, I was on the Human Services and Housing Committee, and we were told that we had a shortage of about 150,000 homes in Oregon. And I'm not on the housing committee anymore, but I'm told that we are short 150,000 homes in Oregon after all of the public dollars in infrastructure. So I do think it's a public-private partnership, but I think right now the focus should be on allowing builders to actually do it, to create homes, to create more homes, reduce the prices. And again, unless I'm missing something, I just don't see a role for the federal government in that right now.
Great, thank you. Nate, question is to you. What role, or is there a role that the federal government should be playing in increasing access to affordable housing?
Yeah, I mean, a couple ideas. I mean, looking at the problem, I mean, it's not an easy, you peel back the onion. I think part of it's the zoning and just creating more housing supply. And, there's a juxtaposition against the urban growth boundary and building up versus building out. But as a father of four, you look for a single family house, and you don't necessarily want to be in an apartment building in Portland, and there's limited supply, and you have limited areas to build out, and it's some of the same issues I face in renewable energy development with permitting. You have a lot of NIMBYs who are pushing this policy, but don't necessarily want those low income houses next to them. They want them somewhere else. So there's a certain amount you could maybe do in terms of encouraging the permitting process around zoning. I mean, it's certainly a very local issue. Creating the housing supply, and there's some socioeconomic challenges. A lot of people, their life savings is in their house. The baby boomers, and I think there's a good Yale paper called Stuck. A lot of people are stuck in their houses because that's their retirement, and they don't necessarily need a 5-bedroom house anymore. When all their kids have left the house. So how we use the existing inventory for, the future generations that have kids that need that sort of space, and, how we, transition, people from retirement, but a lot of it is the supply too, which is building more houses and where we build them. And it's very difficult, much like wind and solar projects when it comes to permitting a new housing development, so encouraging in that process, would certainly be helpful. But, working with local communities on what they would need from the federal government, if there's something that could be helpful, be sure and certainly open to that. Great,
thank you. We don't have much time. I do want to just squeeze in one quick question. And Nate, one of the changes incorporated in the Trump tax laws was a limitation on how much Americans could deduct, or how much of the state and local taxes Americans deduct from their federal return. Would you support either lifting that limitation or reversing that?
Was that the minimum deduction of 20,000, or what's?
I don't know what the limitation is at this point, but it is basically a limitation on state and local taxes that Oregonians and others, California, New York, et cetera, are able to deduct from their on their federal returns. And I guess the reason I'm asking is because this was something that was incorporated as part of the Trump tax plan that has particularly hurt Oregonians above a certain income level.
Yeah, I mean, if there's something that in execution or implementation, I mean, they say that the path of is paved with good intentions, but in hindsight, when you have a lot of these policy decisions, there's something that needs to be changed that makes sense. The tax code is very complex. I just did my taxes now, and a lot of these tax credits are to encourage certain behaviors. So, if there was something that was an intent there that is not being realized, and there's a better way to do it, I think that's just part of making good decisions, armed with the facts.
Okay, thank you. And Ron, basically same question to you. Do you would you support a change to what was passed as part of the Trump tax plan, specifically with regard to the limitation on state and local tax deductions?
I'm glad you asked the question. It has not been posed to me before, but I see no reason to change it. I'm not wealthy, but I'm comfortable on a PERS retirement, and I don't hit that threshold. That means there are a lot of people that underneath me that don't hit that threshold either. I think with regard to tax policy, I do just want to say I think we have a spending problem. I would suggest we've had a spending problem under the last several presidents, and I think that's something that we need to talk about as much as the taxing issue on the other side. And I would say we have a spending problem in Oregon, just like we do in the federal government as well.
Great, thank you. Great, that carries us to the end of the hour. Thank you very much, both of you, for making time to talk with us today. I'll be in touch with any further questions, but we hope to be coming out with our endorsements in the middle of April.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you both.
Great, thank you.
That's a really good conversation. Thanks so much.
Yep.